Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second season of Second Chapter Careers. After the summer and the holiday season, it's so nice to be back, and I'm really excited to have here with us today Michal Kaye, kicking off the season. Michal has a great journey of career change that surrounds entrepreneurialism and a business spirit and a can-do attitude. And I'm really excited to hear her story and share it with you. So let's jump right in. Michal, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your history and how you got started in the career world?
This is so weird. Really bad at these introductions. You think I wouldn't be after 15, 16 years of being an entrepreneur. Hi, I'm Michal. I transitioned from or pivoted is the word I used at some point from being an event planner to a business mindset coach. I work with service based or product based entrepreneurs who are feeling stuck. They want to grow, they want consistency, they want to make more money, but they're not sure how to do it. Most of them are creative entrepreneurs, which means like event planners, which is great because it's my background, bakers, designers, lawyers, interior designers. I really have the gamut of people that I worked with. And so I love it. It literally brings me joy every day when my clients are like killing it. And one of my old clients actually just is opening a new office space. And it was just very exciting for me to see. And she said it's because of me and well, I was the foundation. That is not an introduction, but now you all got the introduction. So there you go. Thank God for that.
Okay, sounds exciting. I can't wait to hear more, but let's start with the backstory. How did you start your life as an event planner?
Accidentally.
Okay.
Very accidentally. I'll put it this way. I moved to Israel over 17 years ago, and I came from a nonprofit background. And in those days, nonprofit, you did absolutely everything. And I mean it in the sense that I was working in the Jewish community, I worked in Hillel, I worked the Jewish agency, and I did everything. I did marketing, I did recruitment, I did events, you name it, I did it. I don't think I picked up, I dropped off, chauffeur, ordered meals, catered. You do everything in nonprofit. And so when I moved to Israel, I started a nonprofit, and then basically the nonprofit world kind of collapsed because we had the Madoff situation, and I ended up getting a job in high tech, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I It was a maternity leave position. It was the first time I really worked in Hebrew, where I really by the beginning of in the beginning, I couldn't run a meeting in Hebrew. By the end of it, I was running meetings in Hebrew in technical language, which if you knew me, I came again nonprofit. I couldn't tell you what a motor was, and I was working in a company was very high techy. And I learned a lot. And I think if they had wanted to actually pay me my worth, I probably would have stayed, but Hashem had other plans for me, and I went back into nonprofit part-time, but while I was working for Mobileye, someone from Toronto was trying to plan her daughter's wedding in Israel, and she couldn't get hold of the vendors, and my mom said, "Well, why don't you speak to Michal? She lives there, she can call them, she has the organizational capacity," and so she did. And it was my first wedding, it was at the Ramada, and I know exactly which vendors to this day we use, like, because it was number 1, and that was my first event. I would call like a day of plus, where it's like you contact the vendors, you negotiate, but she'd already sort of been in touch with them. It was just like finalizing everything. And that was my first event. And then I got another one after that, another one after that. So when I left high tech, it was very much like, what do I want to find a job that I can grow this business, but also still earn an income because I wasn't ready to go full time. Fast forward probably, I don't even think more than a year and a half. And I was busy enough, thank God. And I said, you know what, let me just jump. And I did. And until Corona, thank God, everything was great.
Okay, well, there's quite a lot to pick up on there. First, let's talk about, for 2 seconds, nonprofit. Was that your dream? Were you planning to do that when you were a new employee, let's say? Or that was
No,
also an
I
accident?
actually I wanted to be a fashion designer. That was
Okay.
my lifelong dream, was to design clothes and have my own fashion brand.
It's not too late.
It's not, it's on the back burner, and you never know. what will happen. And I apologize, Mocha is in this. Everyone will see Mocha if you're watching this. If you're listening to this, you don't know there's a cat in this. But I wanted to be a fashion designer since I was a kid. I had Vogue magazines. I remember my father at some point, like I'd been in Israel like 8 years, 10 years. And he goes, "Can I throw your Vogue magazines?" And we're talking like 10 years of like collections, or even 4 years, I think it was, of collections of Vogue magazines and Vanity Fairs. And I'm like, "Yeah, Dad, like it's okay. You can throw them out." Like also because I'd ripped out things that I loved. And also the fashions changed so much. Ironically, it's come all the way back. But so yeah, that was what I wanted to do, and I actually went to fashion design school, and I failed sewing. I sew like a junk driver, and hindsight, I didn't realize that I didn't necessarily need to sew, and I probably could have gone into fashion merchandising, which would have probably given me enough for me to be able to go eventually have my own line, but again, things happen for many reasons, and I didn't, and then I went into what we call the family business, which was Hillel, because my father was a Hillel.
Okay. And okay, well, first of all, I just want to say that I think it's brave of you to share the lack of dream fulfilled, because so many people are just like, oh, yeah, it was successful. So who cares about the dream? But a lot of who you are comes from the dream. And I think it's never too late. So you never
It's
know. Maybe
never
there's
too
a third
late.
act coming.
There is never too late, and you never know. I talk about it all the time. Whether it will actually happen or not, I don't know. The fashion world, the same way as the restaurant world, is not an easy world, and I can't sew. I just have to find people who can sew. But I think anything's listen, I truly believe anything's possible, and it could not be something now, it could be something in 5 years or 10 years, you never know. Or I partner with someone. That's always another way of it.
I love
But
that entrepreneurial spirit.
yeah, I think it's always that I was a creative. I think that was for me something that was very apparent. I've always been a creative. My art teacher wanted me to go to art school, and then my parents moved to Toronto, so me applying to Emily Carr wasn't really on the cards. My parents didn't really want me staying in Vancouver by myself, and I've always been a creative. Like that's never been a doubt in my mind. And what does that mean is that I can't spell grammatically. Although my brother can't spell either, and he's a partner in a law firm, so it doesn't really make a difference, but I love when people, like, comment on my spelling all the time. Like, the other day, I put, "I quit, I quit, I quit." I meant to say, "It's quiet, it's quiet." I was like, "Oh, no, I used the whole wrong spelling there," but I think it was very apparent from a young age that I was a creative, and that affects every single aspect of things, and we don't realize that until I think we're much older. I think nowadays we do, and we recognize that in children or recognize that in young adults, so it's a very different world in that sense, but I when I was growing up, you had to get a BA. The reality is I shouldn't have gone 4 years in university. It wouldn't have been it was a waste isn't yes, great, now I have a BA in history and film, but it didn't like, what am I doing with that?
Yeah.
But right? The other passion I had was Holocaust studies, like, also to, like, work at Yad Vashem was also another dream of mine. Again, I did actually apply when I first moved to Israel to work at Yad Vashem. But it was always recognizing your strengths already at a young age is really important, and it also, especially as an entrepreneur, I always remember, when you used to go into interviews, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? And your weaknesses always have to turn into strengths, right? And that was always what they told us. So I always said it's like being creative is the fact that my mind can work so differently. It's not there's no linear. It's just a very your brain is just different, and so you're capable of in some ways so much more in what you can do or accomplish or because of the fact that you have a creative brain.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really important because a lot of people, first of all, a lot of people who have language challenges, let's say, whether it's because they moved to a new country and they don't speak the language or learning disabilities or whatever, they often feel limited. I work with a bunch of people who have had this challenge. And the truth is that it's, especially in these days, it's really not a limitation. And I want to take a pause there and like really drive that home because there are so many aids these days that you can use for writing and use other parts of your brain for the things that they're strong in. And the other thing you touched on, which I think is also super critical is that you have to know your strengths when you're young. And a lot of people I find do not know their strengths. Either they're, it's such a part of them that they just take it for granted. They don't even see it. I'm a creative, but like I don't even realize I'm creative because it just comes second nature to me. Or they just are not aware that they even have that strength until they explore. That, like, it's a really important thing that you said, because I think a lot of people don't take the time to explore and then they end up in a degree which is either useless or not what they enjoy, or in a career that they don't enjoy.
Yeah, I think all the time is if my parents had said, you know, there was so many, like, hindsights, I should have gone to graphic design school and then eventually gotten my BA through graphic design. There are so many things I think of how my life would have been different if my parents weren't, "You need to go get a degree," because that's what we did in 1990, right? Like that
A lot of that
and
is still today, by the way. A lot of parents, a lot of people, a lot of young students are still struggling with that. That's how it used to be. Maybe it's not like that anymore. And, a lot
I
of
think
people
it
I've
is.
had here have
Yeah,
said that exact same thing. So
but
I
I
think
also
it's
think
good that you're bringing it up.
yeah, I also think 'cause nowadays it's there's so many options, and I would say this to everyone is, like, you can find a way to do what you wanna do and still get a degree, right?
Yes.
There are ways where it's, like, one college in Israel, or there's places in other places, like in Toronto, where you could have done I could have gone to Seneca and then eventually done, like, 2 years transfer to York. I would have got my degree. I just would have done something that was much more aligned to where I was, and ironically would have been able to walk out and gotten a job
Right.
in the field I didn't. And that was the difference was I didn't. And I went into something that again I loved. Working in Hillel was wonderful. It was never a bad thing. I come from the world. It was easy for me. Again, it was event planning, it was programming, it was education. It was everything I knew how to do and I was passionate about. So it wasn't hard for me. And again, using my creative skills allowed me to be successful in that job.
And before we talk about the change to event planning and then future changes, just tell us quickly, how long did you work in Hillel before you made Aliyah?
So I started in Hillel in 1999 and I only made Aliyah in 2008.
And you were there the whole time?
No, I was in Tampa, then I moved to New York and I worked with Hillel and then I moved into the JCCA world, which is like I did like teen travel during of course an intifada, which is so great to do, and birthright. And then I moved back to Toronto because I was like, all right, let me go back to Toronto for a year and get everything organized. And I stayed 3 years because I ended up working for the Jewish agency and I was recruiting for short-term programs and the Aliyah Center. And I was really good. So I stayed 3 years and then it was time to say, okay, you came back for a reason. Um, and I was already at this point, I think once I hit JCCA and my bosses were Israeli at this point, and I was working with Israel so much, it was the question of, well, if I'm already working with Israel, why am I not in Israel? And even more so, I remember sitting in a conference in Toronto at the conference, the Jewish Agency conference, where we had all the shlichim from the country come to Toronto, and we organized it there with my boss because she was the head shlicha, the head and I just remember sitting there going, "My head hurts. It's so much Hebrew." And now I laugh at it because it would be like nothing, but I just remember thinking, this is like 19 years ago. I have a headache, and I looked at my friend whose parents are Israeli, and his Hebrew was probably a little bit better than mine was at that point. He goes, "I got a headache. Let's go get coffee." And it's like we slowly, one by one, left the room because it was just so much Hebrew. And I laugh at it now because in hindsight, it's like, okay, now I'd be totally fine. But it was very much like I'm working with Israelis. And if I'm working so much with Israelis, why am I here?
I imagine in the event planning space, you probably also worked a lot in Hebrew.
So yeah, it was funny. One of I lived here as a kid. I lived here. My parents moved here when I was 2. So I did like kindergarten and grade 1 here. So I have the accent. I didn't have very good Hebrew because we moved so much and we moved to places that were in English speaking and they didn't when I when we moved here when I was 2, and then we moved to America when I was 4, I was fluent in Hebrew. And then in America, we didn't speak Hebrew. We only spoke English. My parents were English. I lost pretty much all my Hebrew. And that it took a really so I always had the accent, but I never had sort of the vocabulary in Hebrew that I should have probably had, um, if we hadn't moved to America when I was 4. So I always had the accent, so that was
That
always a
helps.
good thing. I sound more French Hebrew, and even when I speak, Israelis are like, "Oh, like, where's your accent from?" It's like I don't sound I either sound like I've lived here pretty much most of my life or one of my parents was Israeli, something like that. My races are French, and that's because I learned French and Hebrew at the same time. But again, my Hebrew in Canada was Simla Yafa Yiruka, like very basic Hebrew. So I always understood more than I always could speak more than I understood, which is interesting. Could always understand more than I could speak, but speaking, I didn't sound like I was Anglo. So I remember going into Opan for a month thinking the woman made me speak all the time because I was the only one who could sound like a normal person and didn't sound like she walked out of Brooklyn yesterday. And that's literally how I was. And she would be like, "And Michal, how was your weekend?" And when I told her I was leaving Opan, she's like, "No, you can't leave. You're the only one who could talk normally." I'm like, "I'm 32 years old. I got a job. I need to leave." She goes, "You're 32? Go, get on with your life. Enjoy." So, you know, and, and then I got a job at Golf and Co.
For those who
I
don't know what that is, it's a clothing store.
It's a clothing store. And basically my godfather said to me, he goes, "Michal, I was working in English. Like I worked in a school, so the people in the school I spoke Hebrew with, but the actual job was fundraising and stuff was really most of it was in English." And he's like, "If you want," and I dropped out of Opine because I got a job. So he's like, "If you want to go work somewhere, if you want your Hebrew to get better, go work in a place where you have to talk Hebrew." And his daughter-in-law was the manager of Golf& Co. So I went and worked there for 3 months. I will tell you, my Hebrew got really good. This is really bad English. Got really good in 3 months. My coworkers were Israeli. Majority of the people came in. I was so happy when an Anglo came in, and my Israeli coworkers were so happy that I was there when the Anglos came in. My favorite was the American SEAL guys because they're stationed in Israel. They come in all the time as this is Israel's their rest break. And these giant guys, okay, giant, beautiful American men would come in and they're like, I'm like, "Oh, hi, you need a quote?" Like at this point, like after 3 months, I knew what they were coming from. But that's really and I didn't really work there that long, but it was enough to give me a really good cement. I can tell you what a pillow is, a smicha is. Like I can tell you how to, cushions, chairs. So that was really probably the best uh opan a girl can have because I really was speaking every day. Then I went into the event world and it took me a while, but I could always speak. It wasn't that was easy. Then I started understanding the contracts. Thank God for Google Translate. But I was able to read them. And when WhatsApp came up with the voice thing that turns into Hebrew, like, oh my God, game changer, people. But it still ironically spells things wrong. So they always say to me, you can write to me in English. I'm like, no, it would
To
spell in
practice.
English and in Hebrew. It's irrelevant. So as the events planning business grew, my Hebrew got better because I was really working with Israelis and working with the vendors, with the venues very much. They're all Israeli. Hardly any of them speak English. And even the ones that do, it was so much easier for me to switch into Hebrew that it didn't matter. And I remember the first time I dreamt in Hebrew. And
Okay, tell us about it.
it was just like I woke up and I'm like, "Oh my God." Or the first time I went to a movie and it was about and I went to my friend, I'm like, "There's no English subtitles." And we knew this movie wasn't gonna have English subtitles. And I was like, "Listen, worst comes to worst, you'll translate what I could not answer, not understand." And she's like, "Okay." So we went. It came out. She's like, "You didn't ask me." I'm like, "No, I understood everything." I went home and watched all the Israeli shows I'd been waiting to watch for probably about 8 years. And it was like such a winning moment for me because at that point I'd been in the business 4 years. And so already I'd seen the difference, but to be able to go to a movie and then to be able to go home and then watch TV. I remember I was in Toronto and I was watching my dad was watching Fada or my dad was watching Schlissel. And I only put myself up for the English subtitles when it came to Yiddish or the Arabic. Otherwise, I didn't need to like lift my head up. I was working. So for me, I was working. And then every time there was like a different language, I would lift my head up. And my dad's like, "You don't need the subtitles?" Like, no.
I made it.
I'm like, I would need him. And even my sister makes fun of me because she made Aliyah and she's much younger than me. She goes, "It's your fake Israeli accent." She always makes fun. It's like you're putting it on. I'm like, I'm not putting it on. This is my things. Yeah. But yeah.
Okay, so since you brought up the language issue, I talked to a lot of people who are afraid to make Aliyah because of the language issue, which clearly was not an issue for you, even if it was a fear. So what's a piece of advice you could give to people who are struggling with should I, shouldn't I don't speak Hebrew? What's the
First of
best
all,
advice you have?
I think it's really interesting. First of all, today, and I make fun of people who make Aliyah today, but I feel like, been here so long, I can do that a little bit, especially when I go on dates with guys who literally just got off the train. It's so difficult for me.
But
But
it's so great to do it. The older you get, the harder it is.
I'm not listen, I moved to Israel at 32. So I understand that. It's just, when I moved to Israel, there was no English Maccabi. There was no English. When you called a company, you couldn't get anyone who spoke English. Like Orange would be, okay, we'll call you back when we have someone who speaks English. Now, in some companies today, that still happens, but the majority of companies, there's Russian, Hebrew, French, and English.
And Arabic.
And Arabic, sorry. Yes. But you couldn't even usually could get Russian, Hebrew, and Arabic. Those were the options when I made Aliyah. And now that allows people to be able to communicate much better. You still need to learn Hebrew. I say this to everyone. It's like, take Opan, watch TV. Watch TV. I can't tell you, me watching the news, it was the first thing I did. I got hot. Within the first 3 months of moving here, that
By
was
the
a game.
way, Hot is a cable channel in case someone doesn't know what that
No,
is.
I
It
got
might seem
hot, which was
weird.
cable. It's like, like Verizon, but cable. And they were the worst, probably still are the worst cable company ever. But I watched TV and I watched Israeli news and I watched this and I got to the point where now I'm like, even if I have on mute, I'll watch the Israeli subtitles. Which if you had asked me to read Hebrew 17 years ago, I couldn't have done it. My reading was really, really bad. And now I can open a newspaper, I can get majority of it, or I can see a post that's in Hebrew, I can get a lot of it. Whereas before, sometimes I translate because I'm tired, but that took learning. And I do believe you can learn. I am not a language person. Again, I really am not. I always thought I had learning disabilities. It turns out I don't. Thanks, mom and dad, for testing me. But language for me was really difficult and it does come. And I think people can't be scared. They just have to be open. First of all, I still don't have Israeli friends, although I date Israeli guys, so that always different. And I have tried to have Israeli friends.
Cultural, it's not just language
It's
when it
very
can.
much cultural, but I will say this, my friends all have Anglo-Israeli kids, and I speak to those Anglo-Israeli kids in Hebrew. And that I couldn't, and even the kids say, "Grandma's been here longer than you. Why is Auntie Michal's is Hebrew so much better?" Like it's the running joke. But it's immerse yourself. I lived all over the world. All right. I moved 9 times with my parents, another 3 on my own.
Wow.
Yeah. So I know what it's like. Yes, I moved to English speaking countries. Okay, so there is a difference. But culturally there were difference. Just because you spoke English didn't mean culturally was the same. But my parents immersed ourselves into the culture, immersed ourselves into the community. And even in Israel, which is the one thing you got going for you is you're Jewish, and so pretty much everyone else is here except for, the people that aren't, but okay, but you're coming here because it's a Jewish state. So that's already a win. So there's certain things that are familiar, whether it's the Jewish holidays, whether it's going to the supermarket, kosher, like there's so many things that are so normal and regular for us that it's not. You also have now a world where iHerb delivers and iHerb delivers and Amazon delivers. Like that didn't exist when I first made Aliyah. right? Corona allowed us to get all of a sudden Walt start to exist and delivery to your house for groceries start to exist. And now there's websites in English for you to deliver your groceries. So, there's a world here where you can come here and not necessarily have to learn Hebrew, but there are also the aspect of you can learn Hebrew. You're never going to be fluent. There's always going to be a time that if you have kids here, there's a very good chance that they're going to have to explain things to you more than you're going to understand. But wouldn't it be amazing if you surprised yourself and it was the other way around?
Love that. That's a great attitude.
I always say this is like my cousin, or some went to the army, and she was the first of her friends. She didn't have anyone. She's also divorced, so it was very much her alone. She doesn't know what to do. She didn't know we needed to do T-shirts and this and what's going on. And my friend has her son in Michal, and they're coming the end of I think they might be coming the end of October. I have to check. I'm like, okay, we have to get T-shirts, whatever. And she goes, thank God you're here. And I'm like, yeah, because it's a whole different culture that I think my friends have had their kids go through that I've learned from them. And even if I don't have my own kids, I know that culturally this is what you're supposed to do. But you learn and you do become a part of it. And there's so many more opportunities for people coming to Israel who don't necessarily speak for the language. But I will say, learn to speak the language. There is something about I was blessed that I lived in a building that we were all together during Corona, and then we were all together during the war. They've all moved on this year, like majority of them, I guess two of us that are still like the 10-year people. But if I didn't have the language, I wouldn't have like, again, they spoke to me in English. It wasn't like, but I spoke to them in Hebrew. And I wouldn't have had that experience. I wouldn't have had that because if I was closeted and not speaking the language, or not willing to make mistakes, or not willing to speak Hebrew, which is a very good language here in
Excellent
Israel.
language.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I asked about the language. I got an unsolicited Aliyah plug. You heard it. Okay, so for people who are interested in the event planning world, let's say in Israel and also in other countries, because I imagine that a lot of the principles and the way it
Yes.
functions is the same, maybe you could paint a picture of what that looks like for people who are thinking about it.
Well, it's funny. My mom and my sister are event planners in Toronto. So I actually
Were
they've
they
been
the whole time or they took it up after you?
My mom's always on and off been in events, so I think that's where I get it from. She was a caterer at the OU Center when we first moved to Israel. Like, she was the first caterer at the OU Center. People come up to me and like, "Oh, your mother did my son's birth,"
Mm.
till this day. So I think it's always been in the genes in that sense. When we lived in Australia, she ran things. She ran a camp. She ran a restaurant. So I always had that in the back of my mind. My sister worked with me when she lived here in Israel. She made Aliyah, and then she married a boy, and they went back to Toronto. But she was my assistant for about 3 years of her living here. So she went back and then decided to go into business with my mom. So I actually know in some ways. But events is I think it's there's some things that are different here that they are in the States. Here, it's kind of like the same with bureaucracy. There's a different office for every different paper. So an events interest in business in Israel, a lot of the time you'll be the planner, but you're putting everything together. That means you bring in the photographer, all the vendors. The venues pretty much come set, including bar, catering, and lighting, although ironically you pay different for all of them, and depending on the hall. And then you bring in the designer. Now, designer is basically the florist, but they come with the whole concept. And so that's the difference. And in the States, I found that a lot of the times the event planner is also the designer. So there's a lot of like, it's a one-stop shop kind of concept. And the truth is my sister and my mom are that, where they'll come in and they'll do the candy bar, and they'll have meetings with the florist and the client, but a lot of the times they're coming up with the concepts. Now, a lot of times I also came up with the concepts depending on the client, but that was also a lot of years into the industry. But the wedding industry in Israel, like in anything, it's a billion-dollar industry, and you have 9 million people, and there is never a downtime, because people get married all year round here. People have events all year round. So it's never like a downtime. Most of the time, because I worked with people from abroad, my downtime was usually like February That was it. Or weirdly, just after the Chagim, before Thanksgiving. But there wasn't a downtime across the board in Israel because there's always events going on. The summer is, of course, the busiest because you want to get married outside or you want to have your event outside and we have beautiful weather. So that's event planning in Israel. But the truth is, it works, I think, you know, there are downtimes, much more downtimes in North America or other countries because except I'd probably say in the Lakewood world or the Jewish world where the people get married all the time. But I think in the outside of that, you'll have your Christmas parties, right? But it could be much quieter in February and much quieter in November than, let's say, here.
Okay. And what about, let's say, negotiating? Do you have to be good at negotiating? Is that something you learn on the job? Is it something you trial and error till you get it right?
There are places you can negotiate. Since Corona, that's changed a lot. There are still the venues that are what I call run by the mafia that can still negotiate down. But also, a lot of times that if you have 4, 500, 600, 700 people coming to your event, it's
God.
very different. Yeah. It's very different when you're in the 2, 300. Doesn't mean you can't negotiate, but a lot of the venues are high end that a lot of my clients went to. So there's a
Makes
lot of
sense.
less negotiation and more what can you throw in, right? And
Okay.
even it was like 5 shekel here, 10 shekel here, or it's like, it's winter, can you drop down? I know you gave the same price in the summer. You can do that because at that point, you have a relationship with someone, or you can get them to throw in things so that they don't have to pay extra on a lot of things, so it's all included. So again, I've done weddings or I've done events once I was Israeli, and the Israeli family went in and then negotiated. I'm gonna tell you what happened. He forgot about the bar.
That would do it.
I had been in a negotiation, he wouldn't have forgotten about the bar. He kept thinking the bar was included in the bar. I knew the venue, I knew the bar was included. I told them, and then we're at the tasting and we're having the second tasting. We're having the same conversation. I'm like, "No, but you didn't allow me there because you wanted to be the Israeli and get all the discount and see what you could do." And by the way, didn't get so much discount on the price of the per person, the same thing right? And then he forgot the bar, but I was able to negotiate the bar down. So again, it's just I would say is asking doesn't hurt, right? And sometimes as we'd be like, well, I can get a better price than you. I'm like, okay, you want to go in and get a better price than me? Go ahead. That's great. But a lot of times they're going to give me that price anyway. You're just going to bully them, or I'm just going to ask nicely. And I was always known as the Canadian girl who asked nicely. And in certain venues, they don't. Certain venues are high end. They have to make a certain amount of money per night, and that's it. And that's where the price is. And in the old days, like you would have like venues that wouldn't take you because they need to have 400 people on a Thursday night. No, if you want to have 250 people at that venue on a Thursday night, that's great, but you're going to pay a lot more per person. You could end up paying 800, right? So those are the things that change. First of all, the business changed, the industry changed since Corona, like big time. I can't even tell you what it's done since the war. A lot of things have stayed the same, but a lot of businesses went out of business. A lot of the small mom and pops, like my pretzel person, my donut person, like those kind of things went out of business just because it wasn't sustainable. Because the war, ironically, my accountant calls it Corona on crack. So in that sense is in the States and in North America and in England, there's a lot more options in regards to, let's say, swag, or you can get a lot of things cheaper because here we're 9 million people, whereas in the States, they'll say if swag, you have millions of people buying swag. So the
Right.
price per person, it's different. So here we'll get 4 containers from China. In America, they're getting 30
Right.
300 containers from China. Even with the tariffs, it still can come out a little cheaper. So, like, those are the things I've learned over time that it's just different. We also still can't get a lot of like the kosher candy that you would think that you can get in the States, because in the States, you have like you go to a supermarket, even if it's not kosher, and half the supermarket's kosher. And so it's just a different concept of here we have a lot of different food. There they have so much more food because it's geared to millions of people rather than just 9 million. And so it's different in that sense. Food's
Makes
way better
sense.
here, but I'm just saying it. Yeah.
I really want to talk about the pivot, but I just have one more question for people who might be interested. And that is, you mentioned that you worked with a lot of people that were from overseas that were, let's say, coming to make their weddings or their events in Israel. How does that relationship go? Is it harder to manage someone from afar? Or is it easier because you have more control?
A lot of times my clients, the bride and groom were here and the parents were abroad. Sometime I had one client where the bride saw the venue a week before, the groom saw it on the day of his wedding. Like, I've had those situations. I think thank God for, I mean, we used, it was funny. I think about it all the time. Like, what did we use before Zoom?
Skype.
What how did I communicate with people? Did I use Skype? I don't even know. Because again, I started this business like in 14, 15 years ago. So I don't know what we were using to communicate. We didn't even have WhatsApp. I was BlackBerry and then it was just phone. So a lot of times it was phone. A lot of times I didn't even see them until they came to Israel and met them for the first time. So I think it's funny how the industry has changed because technology has changed. So the invention of WhatsApp kind of killed a lot of us trying to have boundaries because a lot of the business before was email. And then it moved into messaging and WhatsApp, and then that's why people can get a hold of you all the time. So something that I learned is you need to have boundaries. And unless it's the night before the event, you do not need to reply to that person at midnight. There's no reason to.
It's for every industry and every career, by the way. I tell people all the time, if you don't set them from the beginning, you will never set them because
Yeah.
people come to expect an instant reply.
Yeah. So I think that the biggest issue always was like transferring the money and getting the cash because we have to do a lot. We used to have to do a lot of cash and them not understanding, no one takes credit cards. So like those are the things with the normal with people coming from abroad. But the truth is nowadays it's so much easier to work with people from abroad. There's no issues because of the technology aspect of things. So you're able to communicate quite easily, have conversations quite easily, get on Zoom calls quite easily. So a lot of times we would do a lot of the things and the parents would sort of get involved or we had a budget and then I was in touch with the parents when it came to certain things with the budget. But I never thought of it any different to if everyone was here in some
Right.
ways.
Good to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so the moment we've all been waiting for, tell us about your pivot into business coaching. How did that come about? Besides, Corona killed the wedding industry for a while, and then the war, so maybe you got out right at the right time. But how did you come to say, okay, it's going to be business coaching and I'm going to crush it?
So I'll tell you, so it was probably 6 months into Corona before I cried.
Okay, that's impressive.
I think I was moving and changing and I had actually hired a business coach at the beginning because it was supposed to be my biggest year ever and I needed to hire someone. So the first time I was actually going to bring someone on board full time because I just couldn't handle it anymore. And the industry again changed either because of communication. I just needed to have a help and I laugh because like I went through 9 IVF attempts with no help. Like I had 0 boundaries. I am like the poster child of what not to do when you build a business, and that's why I really push my clients to put in boundaries, and make sure that they have them because I didn't have that. I was a workaholic, I never put myself first, I didn't date, in the summer, I was always on my phone with my friends. I remember the first time it was during Corona, like, we were starting to come out again, it was, like, probably a year in, and my friends are like, "It's so nice that you're not on your phone." And it's something I leave actually my phone in my bag now. I don't even take it out when I'm out with friends, and it really changes life up for you. And I don't take it out on dates either unless the date's really going bad and I'm like, "Okay, he's in the bathroom."
Quick, get me out of here.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Send the message to the friend, "Come save me." So I am the poster child of not what to do in regards to boundaries, and so Corona happened, it took me 6 months, and I didn't realize how burnt out I was. Like, how physically, emotionally I mean, I had nonstop been working for 14 years straight. Even if I took breaks and I went home to Canada, I was working. Even if I was sitting in a lot on a beach chair, I was working. I never didn't work, and that is not normal, and I burnt out. And I don't think I realized that until Corona. And Corona for me was a very telling sign when your clients are asking for $200 back and didn't pay me my final fee, which they should have paid me, but because the event didn't happen because of Corona, they didn't. But right, like so many things happen that at the end of the day, as I was defending my vendors, And it was a very telltale sign of something's not right here if I am defending my vendors more than I care about my clients. And I sat with my coach in, I don't even know when it was. I think it was like around September, and I had just had a wedding, and I had just moved and canceled the wedding for like the third time. And I said, I need to make sure that if God forbid something happens again like this, that I'm going to be okay, that I'm going to have something to get up for every morning. And we talked, and she's like, well, why did you go into event planning in the first place? I was like, to help people. She goes, what else helps people? I was like, I don't know. I was like, I don't want to go into social work. I don't like going around. Like, what am I going to do? And she goes, coaching helps people. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's good. And I didn't, and then she's like, you could coach event planners. And I was like, oh, yeah. But again, I was so like, so done having moved so much and changed so much and having to deal so much. Like, I was the goody two shoe Canadian. I hated going against the laws like, in a corona. Like, I was very much like, whatever. And I went back to Toronto. I didn't see my parents for a year. I went back and I was like, I'm not going to think about it. Ironically, like, um, I didn't think about events. I had another job under the table and I didn't even think about coaching. I like just turned off. It was the first time I think in 14 years I turned off. And I came back and I was like, okay. My coach always talks about this thing called founding member. It's like the people you try to see if you're any good at something and then tweak it. Or people, maybe 3, 4 people who I had like gave a month of coaching to. And if they started to make more money and they started to feel like results, I was like, okay, then maybe this is for me. So I did that. And lo and behold, a girl who built her business in a different language, in a different culture, in a different country was able to tell people who were women, ironically, also creatives, how to change slightly a couple things. They started making more money. I had people coming up in the street going, because of you, I can't afford the photographer now because she's raised her prices.
Well, it's not totally ironic. I just want to say because a lot of times creative people, they're not using that business side of their mind, even if they have it. Like you have the creativity and you're applying it to business. But someone who's, like a graphic designer, they're not thinking on the business side of things, even if they could
Yeah.
often because they're so immersed in that creative side. So it's not totally surprising.
Right, and I realized as I built my events business, there was a certain point where I stopped being creative because I was so in the growing the business. I was so in the scaling the business that I forgot about the creativity, the creative part of why I went into this in the first place. And there's a part of that is in I don't want that to happen to other entrepreneurs is I want them to love what they get up every morning loving what they do every day, and that growing the business doesn't diminish that because sometimes it does. We like, God, another day that she's telling me to work on my business. I just want to work in my business.
In the
I'm like, but you
business.
can't grow if you don't work on your business. So, it's the little things that all the things that I went through that I'm fully aware because of our brains, because we're slightly different, that we don't think of, well, how can we grow? How can we grow? How can we grow? What does that look like? Right? How can okay, I'm making money, but how do I make more money? And how do I make consistent money? And I'll have to tell you, even as I grow this business, I'm learning so much because it's a very different business about the business. First of all, the business has changed. Secondly, we're in a very different economic world that we are right now. And so selling is very different. And it's been hard this year. I don't lie. I don't pretend. I even talk to I'm honest with my clients because my clients need to understand that there's ups and downs. Okay. And you have to prepare yourself for the downs. So you have to be aware that those downs happen. So even if you've had consistent, you all just have to know that there are times when, I've been doing everything right. I've been turning up. I'm talked about in rooms I'm not in, but the conversion is less. So the question is why is the conversion less? It could have nothing to do with me. It could just do with the world, right? Or it could do with something. I know this year for me, I was switching who my ideal client is. So I've had this again, when we build our businesses, we constantly pivot. Me pivoting to being a business coach, right, was the big pivot. right? I became the pivot coach because I knew what it's like to switch industries. What does that mean? I know what it's like to change your offers. I know what it's like to train who your ideal client is. I know because you have to constantly adjust your business as you grow, right? And then I was like, okay, I'll only work with women. And then I was like, okay, then I'm creative entrepreneurs. Well, now I'm like, well, what does that mean, creative entrepreneurs? So now I say service and product-based businesses because people will say creatives, well, they don't earn money because they're like artists. I'm like, no, no, I don't mean that, right? So I say creative, service, and product businesses because it's very specific in that sense. And that can be an event planner, interior designer, a graphic designer, a lawyer. I've had mortgage brokers, as in like people will come to me because they want to work with me because they think they know I'm going to get them the results they need. And I do, right? My tagline is majority of my clients double their income within 6 months to a year of working with me. Now, that looks different for every single person because you come in with a different income. But my goal is for you not to burn out like I did. My goal is for you not to lose the creativity, the thing that you get up, why you started, the reason you got open this business in the first place, because that's what happened to me. And I don't want that to happen to you. Right. Right? Like this is the first time I have one wedding next year, which is returning clients. I'm done. I'm really done. I just needed me to say that. And that's scary because I don't know what's on the horizon for the business coaching, right? And I don't know what that looks like. Guys, don't think every day I don't, once a week, I don't look at LinkedIn for jobs. But I've also been an entrepreneur for over 20 years. Okay, not 20. But I've been an
Almost
entrepreneur
20.
for nearly 16 years. Feels like 20, especially when I Kronos down to counts as like 15. I think it thinks, right? But
The
I
past
went,
year counts as 15.
right, like exactly. Like I went through where, again, I thought I was coming back and I was like, okay, I'll do some events and I'll build the coaching business. And then the war happened. So I have such anxiety around events. And it's so weird. People don't get it. People literally look at me like, you're one of the best event planners. People still know me as a great event planner. So now I teach event planners. I get them to grow the businesses. And if you tell me there's too many event planners in Israel, and I will tell you, there's enough, unlimited amount of money in this world. And I have to say that to myself every day. Hashem puts us through tests on a regular basis. I know right now I'm someplace and I'm like, okay, what is it? What is it? What am I not doing? What am I not certain about? Like, what's going on that, like, okay, my ideal clients change. Okay, so my messaging has to change. Okay, so my marketing has to change, right? There's like a flow through. Okay, so then, I still think I offer too many offers. And so I'm like, okay, even though I have a lot of offers, I don't sell all of them, right? So right now I'm selling my workshops. But I need to go, as soon as I sell my I'm done, like October's next week. The workshop in October's done. All right, I'm going back to selling my long-term program, right? Like that, it's just realizing that it's like, it's a constant selling, right? You constantly have to sell. You constantly have to sell those emails. You constantly have to network. You constantly have to show up in places to remind people who you are. And you just keep doing the work. And that's something that taught me in the transition. Right, in that pivot. The pivot was very much I didn't realize that I was a role model and a teacher, and I should have realized that, but that's part of event planning if you think about it,
So
right?
true.
And so I'm just I have a brain, like, as an event planner, and this is the skills of a creative. Not all creatives, but it's a skill of my type of creative, where I can look at your business the same way I can look at an event. So I can look down and I can see the whole thing. I can see the gaps and I think the things we have to work on. Everyone says to me, Michal, do you have a framework? It's like, yeah, of course I have a framework. But the end of the day is I love one-on-one coaching. I did a group program and I didn't love it. Eventually I probably will do another group program again. But I love the one-on-one coaching.
I do
Love
too.
it. Because the transformation is unbelievable. And even though I'll go through a framework, the reality is it's not cookie cutter and it can't be cookie cutter. 99% of the time it's marketing, always. But for some people, it could be systems. For some people, it's organizing everything. For some people, it's boundaries, it's policies, it's packages, it's just getting through the confidence to show up on camera. Like, people think it's so easy for me to show up on camera, to show up on Instagram. Like, guys, you have no idea how long this took me.
Yeah.
No idea. And I will tell you now, it's so much easier to do a carousel where I don't have to show my face. But I've learned that the power of my voice and me showing up on screen, is great. But that pivot for me was a wake up call. The funny thing is, I actually work more regular hours now.
Well,
And
that
even
makes
if
sense because you don't have to work nights.
Right, and even if I'm working nights, I'm sitting on my computer doing something I love. So I'm not I think there's a very big difference. I'm watching TV while I'm working. I also do a lot of networking in the States, and so a lot of my meetings are in the evening, and I'm okay with that. But I really have 3 specific days that I work on my business in and 2 days that I work in, because I coach 2 days and I work the other days are when I do all my calls, when I do and I've now changed where I have Sunday is no calls. None. I've, like,
Love
lit
that for you.
Yeah, it was a big deal for me, and that's now. So, I think you're always pivoting. If you're ever looking to grow a business, you're never if you're staying in the same place, then something's wrong.
Well, I say that about careers as well. What you want to do when you're 20 may not be the same that you want to do when you're 25 or 35 or 50. But if you have skills that you can pivot, then you'll never be lost. Even if you're
Never.
confused, you won't be lost. And there's a huge difference. And for
Huge difference.
anyone out there who's doubting whether they can pivot, I say again, if you have skills or a vision or a dream, you are not lost. You're just not.
Right,
You just need some help finding your way, and that's okay.
right.
That's what coaches do.
Exactly. I think I said this to you when we first talked, is that my brother-in-law's grandfather started his business when he was in his 40s. He's a millionaire now.
It's never too late,
And
like
he
I
said this
said.
to me, and I see this all online, and I see it from other people. There is something about pivoting in a later age because we are now smarter, right? And we're also willing to take more risks because we
Yes.
understand that we get to, right?
Also
There's scary parts of that.
Also smarter risks. I worked at 2 startups, one that had a very young founder and one that had what I call mature founders over 40.
Yeah.
And the difference of working with a mature founder, and if you guys are listening, which I hope you are, it was such a great experience. The difference of working with a mature founder is they just steer the ship with so much more knowledge and confidence. And even if they're doubting themselves behind the scenes, the team really feels it because they have 20 years of experience behind them, or 25 even. And I think that's a huge advantage that should not be overlooked.
And I will say this, and I think you'll agree with me, is the investment in a coach or investment in something, whether it's a program or someone, is essential. Like right now, I'm in like a membership program, and it's really a WhatsApp group, and we have like a networking group once a month. But the coach is been in the business double the amount of time as me, and ironically, she works with neurodivergence. She'll probably be my next coach. I'm, like, toying between 2 things, but she'll probably be because partly because she's been in the business 8 years, and partly because I'm in this membership group and she's giving so much knowledge and I'm learning. And I'm everything that I've learned from my coaches, I've, again, done, I've implemented, I've learned, and I can pass it on to my clients. So when I'm giving this information on, it's because I've experienced it and it's worked and I can pass it on. And it's when you understand, I always say it's easier to sell a coach to a coach because we understand the concept of the investment, right?
Absolutely.
We understand, right? We're going to go to the coach and then that person's going to get me to the next space. But the truth is, it is. But I will say, I bumped into one of my clients. I did a wedding and the hair person was one of my clients, and she's like, "Michal, how do I get to the next level?" I was like, "Well, how did you get to this level?" And she's like, "Blah, blah, blah." And I was like, "Okay, so what are you gonna do?" She goes, "I gotta do this." I was like, "Okay." And my goal is that every time someone leaves me, that they have the skills to be able to, when that next step happens, that they have the tools to be able to do that again. Right? I think that's the same thing with you. It's like we want to make sure that the people have the tools so that when they're in a situation is they don't always have to rely on a coach. I don't rely on a coach. want to learn from a coach to get to the next level. Someone said to me, it's like, why don't you want to do an executive coaching? I was like, that's not the people I want to work with right now.
From the ground up. That's why I work with.
I've, one thing, as when you pivot, your ideal client pivots. So it's not that I'm not working with
Yes.
brand new business. It's that I have calls specifically, people will take the lower, the 90-minute whatever, a 90-minute breakthrough strategy call if they're a new business, whereas the people who I work with long term are people who are more established. And that changes, like, as you grow in your business, you change who you work with, and it's okay. It doesn't mean you're not working with the original. It just means that you're marketing to a different crowd, because I've
I
changed.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I wanted to end with a final question just to leave us with like a bit of inspiration. Maybe can you share, if it's okay, like one of your biggest successes as a business coach that made you feel like I'm meant to be here and this is amazing?
So I'll say it's actually quite funny because I had this client, and it's so interesting because it was before I did all these fancy sales calls. So now I realize, like, your sales calls, want to get people across the bridge. We want to be able to listen to them and have a conversation with them. And she started working with me, and her goal was to, like, she was undercharging. She wanted to onboard her first employee because she was overwhelmed. She was in IVF. So, like, all these things were happening, and she realized that she needed assistance, and I came in. We doubled her income within 3 months. By the
This
end of
sounds
6
amazing.
months, we doubled that.
Wow.
And we still eventually, she was funny because she wouldn't necessarily, we onboarded her first employees, wasn't the greatest situation. She was trying to find a loophole, and eventually she realized she couldn't do that loophole. She couldn't, you know, she needed to find real proper full-time staff. She couldn't do the freelancers. And it wasn't a VA, it was very much freelancers, and we've learned that. And I had so funny because I have a client now and we went the VA route because for her it made sense. And she's not at the point to onboard a full-time employee, but she has two different VAs doing two different things, and for her it works. And it's so because of the things I've learned. And then I had another client who was a lawyer who had we're onboarding your first employee is probably the most difficult thing most people ever do. But the success that this one client had, which was double and double, were that the tweaks were so minuscule. There were things that she didn't. The reality is you think you would have noticed it as an entrepreneur, but it was raise your prices. Stop working with people who you don't want to work with.
Well, it goes back to what I said before about people not seeing the things that are right in front of them. You're not seeing your own strengths, your own weaknesses, your own skills. Like you just don't see it because you're too deep in it. And sometimes, just taking
But there's
someone from the outside is what you need to crush it.
And the reality is the end of the day is, and this is how I work it now, is Hashem wants to give us everything. He wants to give us abundance. He wants to give us success. You just have to be open to it. So you have to be willing to just have certainty that everything's going to work out. And it's not easy. It's not easy.
The good things never are.
Never are, and I think the last 2 years have taught us that greatly, and, it's always we're always learning and we're always growing, and that gets us that little bit closer to Hashem, like, it's the constant, right? And but it's also it gets us better understanding our businesses so that we can it's like you're doing the work so he can take over.
Could not agree more. And I think that's a perfect place to end. So thank you so much for sharing these great stories and this great wisdom and hopefully inspiring many, many people.
My pleasure, thank you for having me.